find yourself on a firm, reasonably firm chair where you can get your sit bones out to the edge. You want to be sitting on the sit bones, and that's what we're here to discover partially, which means you need a tripod, 2 feet and base of pelvis, the sit bones. So when you're sitting, you want to place your feet in such a position for standing and sitting as if you were doing a squat. So for me, that's slightly wider than hip socket, slightly turned out, not wide, reasonably normal, different than just standing, which would be more like this. So for me, a squat, and the knees go over the feet, of course. So they need to be in such a position where I can move forward into a squat and stand, or come down into a squat to sit without doing something weird with my back. So you want to find a place where your feet can be to create that stable tripod. I find if I push down straight armed into and feel that pressure straight into the center of my foot, and if that doesn't change, everything else can change around it, and it's easy to stand or sit as long as that angle remains firm and steady. So we're solid on the sit bones, we're solid on the tripod, and now we're going to talk about the directional movement of the pelvis. Down, flexion, up, extension, lateral, lateral, and how you actually play with that to increase your ability to be sitting in a stable position if you're working at a desk or sitting at a kitchen table. It also improves your standing. So we need to make sure we engage, especially the medial line. I find with most of us, including me, it's kind of depends a lot on our butt and other things, our back, hauling us around. But if we really engage the contact with the floor as much as possible, and engage the medial line as well as the rest, then we can have a more stable situation for the pelvis to be in a neutral position, which then in turn supports the upper body. So in terms of moving the limbs to help the pelvis, or moving the pelvis to help the movement of the limbs, we're going to focus on the basic directions of the pelvis. And so we're going to start with, of course, the flexion, where your tailbone comes closer to the surface, and of course your belly and your chest come together, so you're creating a C curve in your spine. And it's even. I don't just dump my head. I keep it in alignment with the spine in that curve. And then the pelvis has to tilt up again onto the sit bones in order to lift the chest and be in a neutral sitting spine again. And then just the opposite. If we think of the pelvis like a bowl of water, and this is neutral, sitting on the sit bones, so that was like spilling water out the back, flexion. So now we're going to think about spilling the water out the front in extension. The pelvis tilts forward and down, and the chest lifts, and you're a C curve in the opposite direction. And again, I don't just crank my head back. I keep it in line with what the rest of the spine is doing. And you can explore any size of this. I'm doing a fairly big range for the camera, but where do I initiate it? I can initiate it so small and play with it so small that you can't see what I'm doing. But for sake of camera work, we're going to do a fuller movement. flexion, and you play with it, and then extension, and you make it smaller and smaller until you really feel like where is neutral, where really is on those sit bones, and you can feel your contact with the feet and the sit bones, and your chest is supported. Find that place. And just experiment with moving and continuing to find that place over and over. The next thing is the lateral. And I notice when I do this really small, and you do want to do this really small to see how you do it, feel how you do it. I notice if I want to do this movement, straight lateral C curve, right ribs fold like an accordion, on the left they expand, and notice if you tend to also rotate a little bit as the hip lifts to go this way. You push into the floor with the right foot to lift the hip in a certain way that it goes straight that way without any rotation at all. And the spine responds by doing this accordion motion. To the left, I push through or to the right from the left. I push into the left foot to lift the hip in such a way that it goes straight, lateral, no twisting, no rotation, and then lower it. And you can kind of slowly, again, same thing, slower and smaller. Where's that center? So you have the center between forward, tilting the water forward, tilting the water back, tilting the water to the left, tilting the water to the right. And take time to play with all of these. These are all individual explorations in and of their own, so I'm just going through the whole thing for the sake of the video. But make sure you break it down, really, like explore that. Like, is it equidistance in the front? Is it equidistance in all four directions? Is it where you really truly come to a center? So really explore it. And then you can begin to look at that bowl and look at it, well, what happens if I'm pouring it out the front and I want to begin pouring it out to the right or to the left. And I want to pour evenly around the rim in order, so I'm pouring it out the front and I want to go around the rim to the point where I'm pouring it out the side. That was awkward. I try to go slow. Where's the rim of the bowl going in order to be slightly there at the C curve? And the same if I want to pour it out the back. Where is that rim? And you just, each quadrant you explore individually. So now I want to pour it out the right side, but hit every bit of the rim as I go. No, that's not. There we go. And then up to the front again. And eventually you can get to a pelvis making a circle to which your upper body responds. Now, this is by no means a perfect circle, let me tell you. But when I first started this, there were no curves. There was mostly straight ratchety lines. There was no smooth movements and stuff. And then you can come back. Where's the middle? Where's the side to side? Start to find that centered round for sitting. and the pressure in the feet is changing all the time. You find one quadrant where it seems, oh boy, that's just so easy, that's so smooth. You really notice how that feels. How do you do that? What makes it smooth and easy? And then you can sit in the center and apply it in your imagination to the difficult quadrants, or where it's very difficult or impossible for you to access. Do it in your imagination. Notice what that feels like to come around forward, and oh, what does that feel like? Oh, the spine, the ribs do this, blah, 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 this does that, blah, blah, blah. How can I apply that in my imagination to coming around the side that's difficult for me? Really, in your visualization, apply all the kinesthetic knowledge of doing it on the, easy or functional side, and then really build the vision of how it can happen to the other side. And even on a tiny thing, there's something going on with the nervous system. So that's how we can build the smoothnesses of sort of, once you imagine it on that quadrant, then you try to do it. Doesn't matter how small. Like I said, if I did this as small as really a good exploration would be, you wouldn't see it. So I'm exaggerating the movement. This is a really big circle. Don't think you're gonna play with that range at all. It's more in the, tiny range. And you just realize the control that you have in the glutes and the two legs, how they mix and match, and in any part where one section of any of that feels more successful, then really focus on that and feel, well, what about that? Notice the contact with the floor. Notice how it goes through into the hip. Notice what that does to the position of the pelvis, and which way you want to move the pelvis in, and how the other side is responding and working in cooperation with that. So, notice as much as you can, break it down, break it down, break it down. And that's ultimately what we call the pelvic clock. And that you can do this in a seated position, you can do it in many positions, but we're talking about some real stability of the trunk. So, now that we have that ability to at least think and imagine around that way, how do we use that? Well, of course, we've seen this. If I want to go straight to the left for some reason, I'm going to do this or this. But what happens if I want to rotate as well? Well, that's a different story. Now we're going to press through. If I'm going to look over there and I want to reach for something over there, say with my right hand reaching across my body to the left, I have to push through the pelvis in a very different way, and the left side needs to respond in a different way. What makes the difference, I think, a lot is the intention, which sets our eyes in motion, and that directs the nervous system to organize you for looking and reaching to something at my, let's say, 10 o'clock. I'm looking at noon. Let's say I want to reach for something at 10 o'clock, like there. I can't just do that. Well, that's not going to help me get there. I can't just do that. That's not going to help me get there. But what about if I push through and start to rotate? Notice how the knees do. To rotate the pelvis rather than lift. There's this motion. This knee goes forward, and that's the beginning of turning. So one knee goes forward, one knee goes back. The pelvis literally turns. So if I want to turn straight around, I'm pushing on the right foot forward, the knee's going down and forward. I'm pushing in such a way to bring this leg back. So my pressure through the floor is cooperating with this and turning. And this is the way to turn without just cranking on your neck and just doing that. If I just do that, I'm already there without turning my neck at all. And then I have the ability to spiral, continue to spiral. Without straining my neck, I'm looking back here. which I can't even do just by, doing that. So that's where that motion comes in, and again to the other side. You can see this comes back, left goes forward without any lifting motion. There's no lifting motion at this point. Just going straight rotation, spiraling, spiraling, spiraling. Now if you want to combine those actions, so we've got the extension, the flexion, the spiraling. We want to combine those to go reach something at 10 o'clock. So I'm going to start to lift to move the pelvis over to the left side while also moving the knees in that spiraling motion to turn my body. I'm lifting the pelvis and I'm reaching. And this is the stable leg now. This is what's keeping me on the chair. And to come back, I circle the pelvis back and set it down. So that's the big movement, obviously. We're just looking at just what do you do different between the feet pressure and the pelvis to move everything in that direction now. Towards 10 o'clock. What if I want to look at 5 o'clock and reach for something up here? Well, I can just do it this way, of course. But what if I can't for some reason? That's an extreme turn. I would probably actually have to, spiral to get up and get that. But I can certainly go this way. I can certainly go this way. I can certainly go, scooting forward. I'm losing my spot. I can certainly reach that way. It's all focused on how you engage with the floor to move the pelvis, and then allow the pelvis to move everything else. And then you help that movement. I don't resist by making sure if I'm going this way that my head don't want to go. Well, no, I need to go with. So think about how you can include as much of yourself as possible. Notice what the eyes are doing. That's going to organize the rest of the body. And like I say, just break it down, small bits. What do I do with my contact through the feet to move my pelvis in a direction that allows me to both start to lift and rotate in order to go up, or rotate and go forward and flex to go down? How do you come back? This is one of the lessons in getting down to the floor eventually, is how do you get down, what I'm doing with the pelvis, and then we just explore deeper and deeper, deeper and deeper. It's all about my contact through the foot and the stability of the pelvis on the chair. It's all about this triangle always. And at what point, okay, now how do I get back up? Again, pressure through the feet, rolling the pelvis up, rolling the spine up like a chain. So it's really important, of course, in all of these movements, once again, to the triangle thing and just explore very small things. Reaching for this knee, keeping stable. How would you slide down? How do you come back up to neutral? Start wherever you can start. Maybe it's right there. What are you doing? It's all about the triangle of stability and how to influence that. into all these other movements. Now the diagonal one is, now I don't have to use my arm to feel that, but that lateral bending is a diagonal movement. If you feel the connection between the hip and the shoulder, if you feel this, if you add some twist, then it becomes this angle opening up. This angle opening up. And if you think of straight lateral, what's going on between the two lateral sides? I'm not doing it, I'm twisting. It's easier to explain actually laying on the floor, where you really feel connection across the body. I'll show you that lying down. We've talked about that. So yeah, what was that other one that so we got the 4 directions of the bowl, and then the idea of the 4 quadrants, and then finally playing with the circle in both directions. You play with the quadrant, then you play with the top half, the bottom half, then the right side, the left side, and before you really start playing with the full circle. So yeah, and then the reaching and what you do with that triangle of stability to move in all of these directions. And again, do the direction that you can do, whatever that is, and really cement it deeply. And that really takes doing it very, very small and slow. I'm just doing that little lateral C. I'm thinking, well, where does that begin? Where do I initiate that? I initiate it with my intention, and it starts in this whole combination of the foot into the floor and the pelvic floor, moving to lift the pelvis in that direction, and the rest just kind of responds. But it starts with that mental image of, well, I want to do that. And when you're turning or looking at something, mostly we're going through orientation, be it through vision or auditory or both, and we orient with our eyes, and that organizes the nervous system for, oh, I'm reaching for that, because there's a function involved. I'm reaching, or I'm purposely looking, or I'm turning to look at the car coming behind me, or whatever I'm doing. So yeah, I think those are the most in sitting, the basic plays that you want to explore. And it's, again, all about where you place your feet and how you engage the pressure to engage the pelvic floor to control the movement of the pelvis. And so I'm going to stand up, and for that I definitely want my feet in that squat position where my center of gravity can come out over, and there is some, as I bend forward, I do extend a bit. I don't flex. Well, because you're going up, you want to orient towards up. So I've got myself here, and again, I can press in here and find that orientation where I'm right there